So far hotelfo anase esoma wodoma hotelfo ebenya de akwakodi ho anase edin ene wo nanso eni ho ehye nipa da sani ebetu akwawiem ene onyankropon akwatena democracy eyema bibifo anase enyema yen kwasi broni trim popa ene sentia wode vaccination eba abibiman mu na family plan so mpo no enhye ben ana kwasi broni hye ye ewo de krom entia wode etoa yen eba ne sen ana gay ati atese ewo wiase afana nyinara ene we se illuminati ene we se freemason ene we se sumwe mu ni nyinara ahyase firi he no broni mpo awode sanyema we nyara eba no de ato abibimam no ene sen we entram se hwe wake up Africa kwasiada we ni kwasiada bia awia dumienu ekopem awia no mienu live on Royal TV eye adwumadi a ofa poku danko ye executive director edema freedom mind movement ene ofa Israel Nkrumah eye coordinator edema freedom mind movement no
ebeka me Kofi Kumi ho
na yesim konya na madi dwumadi ho chiame na ensem bia tise no ye gina twe kronkron so abakosem ene twere ahodo so na ide mo hu ba bia obibini ufiri enu mu a edro ene soma wosombo na mabrofo sisi ache ebraso se call together twele kaye no etumi bam ne no ana hyase o freedom mind movement dwumadi e fese wake up Africa dwumadi so braso se ye fa dwumadi live on Royal TV so kwasiada we ni kwasiada bia awia dumienu kopim no mienu na ya de wo so adwenche na wasembisa yeye ano edi amount wake up Africa abibiman moma yen sore.
Hey yeah, one business general Abatown Yeniko multimedia so pay video editing, photo shoot, photo editing, documentary, business advert, music video, funeral program, birthday parties, onua uni haukra. Esan say Niko multimedia ebeye ni nyina. Nanso yenwie yo so we your wedding papa bi Niko multimedia si en ha ho kra o me cover ni nyina ma so we are sorry anaso say we edwumakuo bi a o pesa u streaming live o program aye social media handles na aye Twitter, Facebook and the keka ho na Niko multimedia si woni how esan so mo ye ni nyina live abra program na ekoso Niko multimedia si omotonton gadget aye media gadget papa ebini aye audio and video equipment, cameras, speakers, microphones, mixers, nyina Niko multimedia aye ho adwuma Niko multimedia ewo koforidia eho ana motare betimi afrend Niko multimedia ewo 0244549107 aye Niko multimedia the media general ewo town. Thank you.
Amuna oba ye krum se oba betray yamesu eche no toni ba eche no dia sanse akwanu mana dia sanyo akwanu mana dia sanyo akwanu mana dia sanyo akwanu mana dia sanyo
media to the say wake up Africa Royal Television so so for Kofi Kumi matenase na onu mi say kwasi adadu na premo to say na metenase a eyemene mpanyinfo mienu bi enadwumadie yetenase na yesinkonwa edesomo aye wo fa ye popu dankwa a wo executive director edema e fe freedom mind movement one ne ba Israel Nkrumah a ono so ye national coordinator edema e fe freedom mind movement enen so premo ato na ye kwasi ada enya asamketo akra ewo efidua yimu na ene abusua mo fa nche yen se ofa Israel dwumadie bi nti wantimi amepiem ofidua yimu dwumadie foforo atwena kopiem wo baby foforo odi dwuma sa dwuma foforo enu nti ene de mene wo fa yawo poku dankwa enkoa na dwumadie mene no eba bedi na ye de asomwo eye na woche enene ofa asere na woche enene na nye asemkuma akra ewo fidua yimu yetena ase no empanyifo yi kobama ne so na nsema empanyifo atwitwipie ye no na kyerese enye asemkuma akra ni nyina no efa eye ye Pope Francis a wanya ne nkrachi eko na nei onka ate asefo ho na emse ofa ebribi atwam kakra no ofa kyerese oye the last pope a na ti no yenya pope bia biom na no ena pope fi mu no na kyerɛ sɛ ɛnya asɛm ketewa Ghana di boom nkurɔfoɔ course a na ɛba no kyerɛ sɛ ɔfa atwa ntorɔ anaasɛ ɔfa aka asɛm asi ne tiri ase na ɛno ɛna ɛkɔmaa sɛ na afei ɛsɛ sɛ ɔfa ba fidua yi so sɛ ha yɛ anɔka no ɔsan bɛtena fidua yi aso na afei oyi ne ho ano na ɛno na ɔtwe ne nnɛ ɔfa gye akonnwa na ɔde yɛ wura bakɔsɛm mu ɛyɛ malaki ɛdi a onyaayɛ ɛne revelation nsɛm a ɔkaayɛ ɔfa keka bɔ mu ɔnam video so ne pictures so nim sɛ ɔdi ne dwuma no a ɛyɛ no ɛna ɔgyina so ɔwura bakɔsɛm mu a na ɔde videos ɔde pictures na ɔde abɛsi bible no so na ɔde akyerɛ ne nsɛm mu ɛno a ɛno ɛna na wɔtwe ne nnɛ ɔfa ɛfa so a ɔde dwumadie no nyinaa gu akwan mu kyerɛ yɛn ma yɛhu sɛ ampa Pope Francis ɔno yɛ the last pope na ɛnɛ no sɛ pope bi aba biem koraa na ɛyɛ sɛ video sɛ ɛhyɛ ne kyerɛ yɛn sɛ pope bi ɔbɛba biem no na ɛyɛ judgment a ɔde Roman ɛyɛ empire no Roman som no ɛbɛkɔ awieɛ ɛtɔ fam ɛno na ɔtwe ne nnɛ ɔfa bie ne nyinaa so ɛma yɛhu yɛ ɛnɛ nso so menim sɛ watena se yi ɛnɛ deɛ menim sɛ wate saa dwumadie no afi wɔn ti no ɔnsan ɛmfayɛ ɛnkɔhɔ biem na ɛnɛ no ɔde yɛn ba na education a ɛnɛ Ghana ha na ɛne nam baabi a ɛnɛ yɛdi akyire curriculum a yɛdi akyire a yɛnim sɛ ɛno na ɛyɛ education papa a ɛbɛma yɛn no ɛno mu na ɔfa akyerɛkyerɛ mu a na menim sɛ ɛnɛ no ɔde yɛn bɛfa ne mfa bi so ebi a na wonni fie na dwumadie wopɛ sɛ ɔka ho ane wokɔ abɛfo ntentan so a Wake Up Africa GH wohwehwɛ Wake Up Africa GH a ɛyɛ Facebook ne YouTube nyinaa wobɛtumi aka dwumadie ho live na wo nso wahwɛ bi ɛna matena si nso fa SMS ɛna WhatsApp message fa brɛ me mɛkenkan ɛde ama wo number abɛfa so aba no ɛyɛ 0206 519335 0206 519335 Lepacho nkaibɔ kakra ɛwɔ hɔ na nkaibɔ ɛwɔ hɔ ne sɛ woyɛ free the mind ni na woyɛ leader nkwa wɔ free the mind mu a yɛ ready isan sɛ ɛyɛ na wɔtwe ɛwɔ yɛ nim ya na wɔtwe ɛwɔ yɛ nim on the 10th of April on the 10th of May 10th May ya Pacho dwumadi a ɛba no ɛyɛ school enti woyɛ free the mind mi na yɛ wɔ free the mind mu na yɛ leader ukuta leadership position bia yɛ ready say on the 10th school no baby obia emepiem on the 10th woyɛ leader nkoa ɛwɔ free the mind mu a saa dwumadi untimi enyi ohun fim 10 o'clock pepepepepepepepe na wapiem wɔ kaokudi onim sɛ ɛhɔ ɛna yɛhyiam ɛyɛ venue no ɛyɛ kaokudi ɛyɛ culture center 37 hɔ a kaokudi culture center hɔ ɛhɔ ɛna yɛdi dwuma no ɛno nti on the 10th bomoden na ba bia wo bia o Ghana fa na ha no obetumi aba no aba bipiem na wo nso dwumadie no ode wo ho ahyem dendenden so pa me kodwa man so kakra na ma didwa kakra ɛyɛ Israel consort yenyina nim sɛ ɔno ɛna ya ɔde quantum spectacle yi abadwa man so na quantum spectacle yi dwumadi a edi kɛseɛ pa ɛyɛ sɛ ani yare deɛ apart from glaucoma no sɛ wani no okenkan adeɛ na ɛpuru nsuo okenkan adeɛ na ɛsɔ ɛtum ne fɛ na kusukuku wɔ ha wobon sɛ asɛ wani mu no upie han mu na ɛsɔ ɛtum ane saa spectacle yi ɛwɔ hɔ sɛ ɛbɛboawo ɛna obia nso so a ebi a wo dwumadi ahodo a wodi ni nyina no ɛyɛ screen like TV so laptop so tablet ne ne keka ho ɛso na wodi wudwuma esan radiation ti ahwani wei wo sha ɛbɛbɔ ho ban wei me san to ne din sɛ busua nkyɛmfa esan sɛ wo sha ɛbɛsɛ wani ni yare wei yɛmfa nkenkan ade o yɛde sa ani ni yare enti wo sha na ehili wani no ɛsɛ wani ni yare wi a na wayi ato hɔ ebi ana wo faase bi wo fa bi wo anti bi wo sowa bi wo nana bi na ɔno so wɔ ani problem a na ɔno so afa na ɔno so ɛde agye na yaresa ɛno nti na mato ne din sɛ busua nkyɛmfa Ghana ha baabi biara a wowɔ no opusu saa ahoma yi a yɛde ebi bɛbrɛ wo ɛyɛ 0244888910 0244888910 anaasɛ ɛyɛ 0206519335 saa numbers yi nyinaa wofra baabi a wowɔ Ghana ha bia no spectacle unsa ebetumi akabi maka ne sa wie no afei mame enna panyina di na afei dwumadie no yemfa enhyehyɛ so aba
kobi
mo akwa
ejo so
aba mbize na de bibia eboko
bibia eboko se na de bibia
eboko na okay Israel baby a wo bia yetiawo ai baby a wo bia yetiawo yenim se obaade enhwe wo so maye na wotwe wo yanim yentutumi omie kwan mu na afei beka ye ho wo fidie mu na yemfa dwumadie no na minim se nanka why ready so beto bombo pa na so dwumadie bi nti aha enti yetiawo baby a wo bia aba kobi aha abusuafo aye krado nunu se fidie we mu ani fidie yi so de aha yedi adesua ye fa adesua ye pa adesua ye nya adesua ye tase adesua enu nti abusuafo ema se me che bebre a menya asem sansa ha ena omunya omadesua nyina afi enu nti sabri eda ne dwumadi ndi ama me das
yo kofi yedi ka e be chia ahwefo nyina
ahwefo eje so
na ya ka se last week the end be twem and then you try nkomudi a you did so and then so no you call the next chastisement so above no chastisement progressive the fee enslavement and then you colonialism
okay
and ona e ba ya e ma kwan missionaries in the ba be prepare yadwini e be can say slave trade ni de enye e mo de nso ba mo the schools e ba na o ma ba be boye ami etinya rediscover ho eno ko ani bubu enti bi ase no e ko say wọ́n mú bá be preaching cultural assimilation and cultural imitation enti na no wọ́n di nya yadwini and wọ́n local no and wọ́n di akọ eje bi the 15th century ba no a imperial powers enso ba ye no on be do Africa no mu say na continent ba na ye overwhelmed with resources say coffee ni timber ni cocoa ni dia na we cotton
bibia
wa don be say aso wo ne ma we say dia anyway yan hwe na ja de egbenya na de akọ enti anu cause packing the friend stripes conflicts any entokwa obi di kan ba member say wa ba gokus obi hu ne ma o ha na ni yonko boni enso be no ababu let us say we 12 year no take control enti anu na course na your brain empire Portugal and the other ba say David I say nyina yetimi kotras na ya no babai se me medical ba ma ba bi na bibia ehia ma so ba babum so ba beji ko la so ko fe odie ndi esa dia a the summit ebeba ndo mo to message we ko no let us akwa say ampa eni ehia ma say yetimi nya conference yetimi trase na yetimi koya anubabae yetimi che continent no che continent no sisi ya hu so ne ma ni nipa mu kura mpo no yemu wo mu kura so nipa bi wo nti omu yesa no and omu yesa ne ibisha the initiative for the conference was seized by Otto von Bismarck Iron Chancellor Germany ntono say die ese etimi bechia o Germany na ye fa adwen ye etimi hu say conflicts are caused as a result of mba bilia metu ehunu ade so babu na different in seven near no na yintimi enkonkosia na yenye enti oni Portugal ne Britain ne France edidi nkobo na omu nyina hia se be hia o Berlin aho na ebe kwa hia ne aye de ese ye enti Berlin conference ho asem ne ye ba beka
okay
na ye beka yanko Joel chapter verses 1 and 2.
Okay. Joel chapter 3.
1 and 2.
Okay. Yeah, kind Joel chapter 3 verse 1 and 2. I say, for behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat and will plead with them, therefore my people and for my heritage, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. Of Ambacho 1 and 2, no? And I'm away.
And he said, Joel can scatter my people.
And as I say, so no, Omuchichemu, Sinekoso.
And you know, they've scattered my people, no transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
Never a time before across the Atlantic. Scatter our Mukoi. And what China video, assassin require Babbage.
Berlin a boom.
Babbage.
Can I do not do as a home come?
Yasha home come, certainly. You can't order that.
Of a way, you need to say our Bible move. And then there will be such saying, okay.
And in November 1884, I could see February 26, 1885, in a conference, a bass. And the Bible is on the war map, from the Boer War, Africa. I don't know if school near see physical geography, and no country view forests, rivers, many money. So every day the quarter of one yeah. You will see no coso. Yeah, me check. And you know, one the big car call her. When I'm more, I'm kakana. When I'm baba attack me and then they are coming in the year to you into Munya. I will see. And he on the shy. All European countries except Switzerland. Man could be, or man can be about Berlin. America for crab babies. Moko transia or moka some bayano. And a lawyer, sir. European lawyers. One day, and maybe buy, and then on the bar, or much more mummy, say, where the ambabe can for 2 3.
Okay.
Terra nullius.
Okay.
Terra nullius, when you say, assassin Ayakomuno, a vacant and available to gain the occupiers.
I guess any Pabia Africa land.
Terra nullius. Into the barber chair. And do make my first picture no make that.
Okay, yo. Your first picture no Terra nullius. Euro-Gentile conspiracy to make Africa vacant for their occupation. Yo, Bukuno, Terra nullius Bukuno no Fadia Mayeno. Okay, I see Euro-Gentile conspiracy to make Africa vacant for their occupation. Terra nullius is a Latinate designation in Euro-Gentile international law, which means vacant territory available to the occupier. Its origins are traced to the obnoxious Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, which formulated this law, empowering the Euro-Gentiles to confiscate, divide, exploit, plunder, and rape the entire continent of Africa. Of Ambato, baby, I'm making
Medasi.
Yo, Medasi.
And law on my apply. I the Africa war map. I send why we be chiche continent in Indiama. Na the uncle share mu nyina no. woman to me invite one African say leader, say member, say representative obi amaho woman eja woman che according to semia woman edia woman benefit. Go the next picture.
The next picture no at Berlin, Africa was regarded by European lawyers as terra nullius, vacant and available to the occupier. If I move first picture no into Somalia.
Enti society dia Africans so the name say and son of Benin Urban, we had great empires. Yankai Kra about West Africa, there were so many empires and kingdoms. We Ghana Mali song that free Honoma. Na yo Oyo any Adesa Neke Kahun Dahumi, then Ababe Benin. There was a bigger kingdom be an flourish home. And so I call eastern part of Africa as well, the kingdom of Zimbabwe. And I call Kush kingdom in the America. But I don't know about the kind of the country say, oh, Omukra are capable of thinking for themselves. Intino says, the Baba Chimu, na say na ebisi ache no ye de emfa ho say abusuani mi be ba ha na bi ba ha ye de ade say resources nti ene chese de buy enti say na ye wo a great empires and kingdoms e wo ho na say enne we so abasa the colonialism aba oba betwe akode a na say it may refresh your mind yet me say ansa na buni ban kra na Africa to say. First video.
Okay. About first video no Africa before the colonial powers.
No.
Africa before the colonial powers. First video no ngumaye.
Before the arrival of colonial powers, Africa wasn't a continent divided by arbitrary lines. It was a rich tapestry of interconnected peoples, thriving kingdoms, and sophisticated civilizations. These empires and kingdoms didn't just exist in isolation. They often interacted through trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. For instance, the Kingdom of Aksum, located in what is now Ethiopia, was one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in ancient Africa. Aksum was not just a political power but a center of commerce and culture, dominating trade routes across Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and even the Indian Ocean. Its people were pioneers in many fields, from architecture to mathematics, and they were among the first to adopt Christianity as a state religion in the 4th century, centuries before it spread to much of Europe. In West Africa, the Mali Empire ruled over vast regions from the 13th to 16th centuries, dominating trade routes that spanned across the Sahara Desert. Mali's wealth was legendary. Its ruler, Mansa Musa, was one of the richest men in history. In 1324, he embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca, and his lavish spending along the way led to the infamous inflation of gold prices. His empire was not only rich in resources but also in knowledge, fostering centers of learning like the legendary Timbuktu, home to scholars and thinkers who attracted attention from across the world. Further south, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, famous for the great Zimbabwe ruins, was another example of African unity and power. The Great Zimbabwe Kingdom thrived from the 11th to the 15th century and was a major trading hub, particularly in gold and ivory. Its impressive stone architecture, including the Great Enclosure, stands as a testament to the advanced engineering and social organization of its people. Africa's political structure was not simply a collection of isolated kingdoms and empires. The continent's diverse peoples were bound together by shared political and cultural frameworks. There were many examples of cooperative governance, where kingdoms formed alliances based on mutual interests. One notable example is the Oyo Empire. In what is now southwestern Nigeria, the Oyo Empire was one of the most powerful in West Africa, and it had a sophisticated political system based on checks and balances. The Alafin, the king of Oyo, ruled with the help of the Oyo Messi, a council of wise men and military leaders. This system of governance ensured that power was shared and distributed, preventing any one individual or group from having absolute control. In southern Africa, the Zulu kingdom under Shaka Zulu in the early 19th century was a model of unity. Shaka unified disparate Zulu clans through military conquest, but he also created a powerful and cohesive nation through social reforms and the creation of a strong military structure. His innovations in warfare, such as the famous horns of the Buffalo Formation, changed the course of African military history. But then came the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885.
The west coast of Africa, looking today much as it did 100 years ago. At that time, the old evils of the slave trade had become a distant, though disgraceful, memory. But there now opened a new chapter of confrontation along these tropical shores. In past years, Europeans had come here for profitable business. Now they wanted more, much more. Old trading posts like this one had long been the scene of a partnership between maritime traders from Europe and local Africans. By the 1880s, that old partnership was being swept away in a dramatic change, the outcome of a new European drive for overseas empire. Industrialized countries led by France and Britain had begun to invade the black continent, each hoping for new sources of raw materials for its factories, new markets for its manufacturers, and new positions of advantage against its rivals. This was called the scramble for Africa. By 1914, only two countries remained outside European possession, Liberia in the west and Ethiopia in the east. Britain had seized the lion's share of control. Egypt and the Sudan in the north, the immense wealth of South Africa, valuable colonies like Rhodesia and Kenya, and richly populated territories such as Nigeria and the Gold Coast. France had invaded Algeria in the 1830s. Now, after new wars of conquest, she added more colonies to her empire south of the Sahara, including the island of Madagascar. Little Portugal carved out two vast colonies, Angola and Mozambique, while Imperial Germany took the Cameroons and southwest Africa, and on the east coast, Tanganyika. The vast Congo basin fell to King Leopold of the Belgians. Italy and Spain completed the enclosure. The fate of the continent was utterly changed.
European colonial powers gathered in Berlin to divide Africa among themselves, without consulting a single African leader. This is where the real map of Africa, the one that most people are familiar with today, was drawn. These artificial borders, based on European interests and not African realities, cut through established trade routes, cultural territories, and ethnic groups. They disregarded the natural unity that had existed for centuries and replaced it with straight lines and geometric shapes, many of which still exist as national borders today. For instance, the House of Fulani people, an ethnic group that straddles the borders of both Nigeria and Niger. Under colonial rule, these people were separated by the border drawn by the British, dividing a unified community. In other parts of Africa, entire tribes or ethnic groups were split in half, causing tensions that persist in post-colonial times. These colonial borders didn't just appear on maps. They became a reality for millions of Africans. The divisions created by colonial powers didn't respect Africa's complex social fabric. Instead, they imposed foreign identities on people who had lived for centuries with their own systems of governance, kinship, and relationships. This is why we see the legacy of these borders in many of Africa's
Wake Up Africa, Royal Television. So now you can video of Emma Yehu before Berlin Conference. na abibifoɔ empires a na ɔmo wɔ asase ne so a yehu Ethiopia empire na ɛyɛ empire kɛseɛ paa Mali ɔno so na yɛka empire wabɛdi so a ɔno so aba ne deɛ ansa na Oyo Nigeria wenum nyinaa yɛ ade a na ɛwɔ hɔ ansa na Berlin conference ɛba ɛno nti ɔfa ɛpɛ sɛ yehu sɛ na abibifoɔ wɔ hɔ a na ɔmo wɔ mu tumi yɛ ɔmo adeɛ governance na ɔmo yɛ ɔmo adeɛ dadadadada ansa na kwasi kɔkɔɔ ɛde ne deɛ ɛba ɔfa mbato ɔmo daase
enti deɛ mede bɛka ho ansa na mbato aso ne sɛ wohwɛ Mali empire na Mansa Musa ona na ɔyɛ ɔhene a na ɔwɔ hɔ no otu kwa akɔ pilgrimage to Mecca ɔkyekyɛ gold wɔ kwan so sɛ ɛde inflation kɛseɛ ɛbɛto hɔ for years gold value no ɛte kɔfɔ mayɛ mfi nso sɛ university di kan ɛba wiase University of Sankore Timbuktu enti na sɛ yɛwɔ ɛnneɛma wɔ nyinaa gu hɔ ɛde na broni ba bɛka kyerɛ sɛ Terra Nullius continent no kwa vacant say any aba as new occupiers and the aba beche yes 7 years the tintin ni tietie nyina ne say e before dane yetiko e de ma obade as ye obade afi ye kwan so yes enya new gods wo mu ne eba abeso wo mu a na de to ye no e na ato ye entina ba say enam say ye yi ni afi obade ni nim de ni nhihye enti no orunso ma nome oye ma nome ye ni ana ede nome no ebeka aye ho ansana akoskoko ba ha o kan say asase no kwa ne dia ya chedi ana emu ne manyina odeko na ye kwa enim no ya beti e ho ase u be kan West Africa magazine dia na ewo Ghana ha me bi atwam we 25th February 1985 edition. We can be about the Berlin Conference.
Yo.
We
are West Africa. Hey. Okay, yo. 10 years of the Lomé Convention, the Berlin centenary. Okay. Of the book here, my magazine. Na ye kan efi baby a wa mark her. Okay. I say in Africa, the story of exclusive boundaries as a basic requirement of the modern state system must begin with the Berlin West African Conference. The conference was a response to the need to bring a little order into a state of affairs that was fast degenerating into imminent danger of armed friction among the competing imperialist states. Of Ambato Ahano Mewie. Okay. Ahansu Sunon. I say the conference was certainly not the beginning or the end of European imperial rivalry for territories in Africa, but the rules and regulations that were drawn up by the delegates rationalized the previous activities of the contracting powers and dictated the pattern of subsequent development. For example, it was the rule about effective occupation that resulted in colonial territories with a demand for definitive boundaries and visible administrations. In other words, it was this Berlin rule that launched Africa into the orbit of a new world of sharply bound territorial states of the model of the European nation states of Ambacho maybe.
Rebasi, enti magazine na miehu first part na kenkan no the rivalry that grew amongst the colonial powers. When I'm di kan ba ha adenti na abebu miaji Christian Borg Castle. This in the sat of the Kusi. We are saying a bomb up on one for you, have before not taking over. A console baby. ɛno nti na ɛbɛma ɛyɛ necessary sɛ ɛna yɛnkɔ Berlin yɛnkɔ settle biribiara ɛna wɔn kɔɔ hɔ nso a yɛkɔ settle a wɔn lawyers ɛdi kan de buɔfo kɛse aba Terra Nullius ɛno na yɛde ba abɛkyɛ nti abɛ yɛ setting in the process of Terra Nullius. Africa continent is vacant and available to the occupiers. Second video no yeah. Terra Nullius. How imperial powers visualized a vacant African continent available to occupiers.
Century would mark the beginning of European colonization on the African continent. Portugal would start early by laying claim to their new colonies, nearly a century before the Dutch would do the same in South Africa, creating a growing settlement in the Cape of Good Hope. France's Napoleon had his sights on later British-controlled Egypt by the end of the 18th century, and a couple of decades later, the British would take aim at the Dutch Cape of Good Hope. It was shortly after this that Liberia would become home to newly freed African-American slaves, with American approval, to create their own colony. The following decade thus saw a continued steamroll of European colonists rushing to African lands with eager hopes and ambitions on behalf of each of their nations. France seized Algeria and pushed onward. Britain continued its attempt to wrangle South Africa. Germany finally entered the scramble, as Otto von Bismarck looked to establish his country's credibility as an imperial power alongside the others. And further interest from additional European nations eventually led to the Berlin Conference. With tensions on a precipitous rise between European powers, all vying for power and control in their newfound playground, one Leopold II of Belgium hoped to take advantage of the chaos. Hoping to expand his kingdom beyond his humble lands of Belgium itself, Leopold laid claim to what he named the Congo Free State, informing his European neighbors that he was a passionate humanitarian who only hoped to aid the people of Central Africa through abolitionism and further humanitarian aid. Leopold asserted that his new Free State would be a land of rights and liberty for its people. This was the exact opposite of what Leopold would actually do, and he had known all along that his motives were far more sinister than what he told his peers. His leadership over Congo was brutal, and the surrounding European colonizers eventually caught on to his imperial scheme. They reacted by attempting to squeeze Leopold out of Central Africa, by briskly expanding their own territories around him, and around each other. But this led each of them into a downhill tumble, rapidly nearing a collision with one another. Hoping to avoid an all-out war in Africa, or even at home, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck called his rivals to a meeting. The Berlin Conference would open on November 15, 1884, and last until February 26, 1885. The conference, involving not a single representative from any African nation, had one main aim: split up Africa and place its lands into European hands. This was done first by solidifying claims already made on the continent by the European powers, and additionally by laying a foundation for how the rest of the territory could be taken by a European state. A clear process was set up, although again, this was done entirely without the involvement of the local African populations. Nevertheless, it went as follows. Once a European state sent explorers to a certain African territory, treaties would be written up and signed between the Europeans and local leaders, generally written only in European languages, not understood by these African leaders. The treaties allegedly gave European protection to these locals, but this was far from the truth. After returning to their homelands, the explorers would have their treaties approved by the local governments first, who would then take the agreement to the rest of the European powers from Berlin Conference and negotiate recognition for their newfound claims. Once the treaty was confirmed by all of the imperial powers, the annexation of the African territory became official. Thus, with the aid of the rules established at the Berlin Conference, the scramble for Africa carried on into the early 20th century, when the world instead turned to a new predicament, the First World War. The official timeline for the scramble is generally set from 1870 until 1914. But why did it happen? One exact reason does not exist, but multiple motivations seem to have cumulatively led the European powers to act in such haste and disregard for the native peoples. Fundamentally, it's important to remember that the Europeans generally viewed their African counterparts as culturally, racially, and intellectually inferior. This means that the explorers and their governmental authorities believed that Africa was free real estate, and the locals were incapable of forming their own independent, functioning states anyway. To the European mind, to take all of Africa made perfect sense, and was even morally justifiable. It especially made sense when the Europeans discovered new resources in Africa, such as coffee, sugar, and rubber, that could be extracted by utilizing the labor of the local populations. These discoveries were made through exploration, something that Europeans had been doing for some time now, often driven by each empire.
The word no terra nullius ase na ne atire nyina ne se kwasi kokofo omufo mu krom an omu decide se bibini krom no asase ne da ho mpan a sabere na ye kan nyina na nkrom wo ho empires wo na omu di Africa so a na omu wo mba bi omu ye bom bra eye omu niema broni se sa asase no da ho pan a obi ani so enti yenkofa asase no omu ekuchire side ena omo de beto so ena omo yiye nkrata na kwan omo fa so no ena omo di side nti omo yiye nkrata ne ye no broni kasem enti ye ba ti se bibifuo no ye ba mo kasa no aye no mo nti ase ye nkrata ne de beto mo mpanyifo anim se won nkranta yi aha ebeboa ama ye nyina no yatena asomdwe so kama nti mo nsensan na yempanyifo no enti omani ba ho so no na ga se o masensan nkrata ne ewom ne ne ye kire pa kire no no munim omu ye no mutam ni nyina akoye no mu ye ehu lawyer so omu de broni kwasikoko no fizo wonyansa na mpanzo so to de nyansa bebiti bibini na omu ye no afa ombe jeans ase ni nyina te chance ase ni nyina afa enti broni bibini ani ba ne ho so no na asase no ote so no anya ne dia bium yaje ti mu niema ni etase ko we anything terra nullius ye bodin ye bi wu kwasi broni abamba cha me dase
enti broni di aba ofa koti kwa so ama abifo mpanyimfo ediensa ahyenkrata ase ediensa ase do ama wo enti abedi wo mu nsem ebedi wo mu nsem na afi de mba be start efize ye hu se cotton wo ha ye hu se timber wo ha ye hu se cocoa wo ha ye hu se coffee wo ha ye hu se enu bo de nyama gold ni manganese enu de we de ka
asase kama
enu omu sa be so mu omu no history mu the country say the first industrial revolution of Europe. Our was sheep factory as soon the raw materials Africa had a war. Into no best sa what they call. To buy no one buy say no there was a raw materials into the anyone say the only thing before between the abba in terms of competing on world market raw materials in the nuna the guy no shamunsa muntimi nye bibia this raw materials ya and say mo pushi na mo de emaye and the terrorists na set piece after the akwa the detailed report of the Berlin Conference of 1884. The third picture, the video.
Okay, the third video, no, the obnoxious Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 and the balkanization of Africa. Mufasa video no engumai.
It was at this conference in Berlin, present-day Germany, that African lands were divided on a map, while the Africans themselves were exempted from the meeting. It was not an omission of invitation or a simple oversight. Rather, it was a large-scale legalized daylight robbery. Africans were considered irrelevant and incapable of making meaningful decisions on what happened to or on their lands. Since they were uncivilized, according to these European invaders, they needed help, and the participants of the Berlin Conference were to be their saviors. Towns, lands, and rivers were all portrayed on the map that hung on the wall. With just a ruler and pencil, borders were formed, territories were claimed, and trade routes were created or removed, while historical background, cultural laws, sovereignty, and traditional institutions of a people dating back thousands of years were completely ignored. And just like a piece of cake, Africa, the second largest continent in the world, was shared at a conference table. The Berlin Conference was organized by Otto von Bismarck, the first chancellor of the new German Empire, who was concerned with securing portions of the continent within which exploration had begun. The conference birthed the General Act of the Berlin Conference, which had been nicknamed the Scramble for Africa. The conference consisted of top European nations who were invested in exploring the resources that abound within the continent. This was justified under the guise of civilizing or developing the countries which they considered barbarian and primitive. This paved the way for the colonization of the African states by the Western countries and eventually robbed the continent of its rich cultural heritage and linguistic diversity. By the time most of these countries would gain independence from their colonial masters during the 20th century, great damage had already been done. The structures and systems that had been laid down by the colonizing nations made inadequate provision for self-sufficiency and thus had a great dependency on their colonizers for survival. So, how did the Berlin Conference come to be, and what impact did it have on Africa as a whole? There was a general belief by the Europeans that Africa belonged to no one in particular and had to be claimed and developed. When the Berlin Conference took place, no African individual or leader was present. Ironically, Africa had experienced a great deal of development before the Europeans. By the 13th century, different empires within Africa had attained global prominence, drawing the attention and curiosity of the Western world. Some stories about the level of wealth contained within the continent seemed too good to be true, but with the discovery of the Congo River Basin in 1874 by Henry Morton Stanley, there was certainty about Africa and its rich resources. One of the leaders who was very interested in these discoveries was King Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold had previously formed the International African Society, which had a mission of civilizing Africa. He teamed up with Stanley and eventually created the International Congo Society. This was similar to the former society but had more goals added to be achieved by the society. But Leopold was far from being a sincere man. He was a strategic and cunning leader who wanted to advance his personal wealth with Africa's resources. He began sending explorers who doubled as his representatives in laying claims over a wide expanse of land at the center of the continent. In the course of his civilization agenda for Africa, he secretly bought off investors in the International Congo Society. Stanley went to the area to try to establish the Congo Free State, This was while other European nations were also in the scramble for Congo. France, on discovering Leopold's hidden agenda, sent their own explorer, Pierre Savognin de Brazza, who created Brazzaville and mounted the French flag, while Portugal laid claims as well on the Congo area, which they backed by treaties signed with leaders of the ancient Congo Kingdom. Other European countries began taking interest in a continent of gold they had heard rumors about, and this resulted in competition and great conflict between these nations that were claiming different regions of Africa. Great Britain and France were both having conflicts over West Africa, Portugal in Egypt and Britain in East Africa. Leopold and the French also had conflicts in Central Africa over the Congo area. The German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, whose country was considered an imperial power, also picked up interest in laying claims to African lands. He sought to resolve these conflicts by calling for the Berlin Conference. Bismarck felt these conflicts arose because there was no equal distribution of access to the economic advantage Africa provided, and called for the conference to resolve these irregularities. This proves that the purpose of the Berlin Conference was largely economical and not for developing the African states. Countries such as the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Belgium, Denmark, France, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway, and the Ottoman Empire were represented at the conference. The conference began on November 15, 1884, and went on for 14 weeks and 5 days, ending on February 26 of 1885. In the Berlin Conference, territories claimed by European countries were to be legalized, formalized, and then drawn on the map to avoid further conflict. Trade routes were also agreed upon amidst colonies, and a framework for colonizing territories was created. Explorers were to be sent out to explore the African lands. Then, they would proceed to offer protection to the indigenous people of that land by signing treaties with them. Finally, the European explorers or ambassadors would return to their home country with the treaty signed. Then, the government of that country would inform or negotiate with other European countries so that their claim over the African territory would be recognized and uncontested. In all of these establishments, Africans were not included or considered, although it was their land that was being divided. They were regarded as incapable of ruling themselves. It would also be interesting to note that most of the time, the indigenous rulers did not even understand what the treaty was about or what they were signing. In some scenarios, these treaties were signed by makeshift leaders who did not exactly have the authority to do so. However, one African leader saw through the tricks of the Europeans. Menelik, an important leader in Ethiopia who would eventually become emperor, wrote a letter to the participants of the conference clearly stating that Ethiopia would not be needing their protection. Although his letter was ignored, Ethiopia and Liberia were the only African states that were not colonized in the scramble. The Sultan of Zanzibar begged to be present at the conference, but to no avail. Little did he know that he was to be part of the main topic of discussion. Made provisions for different trade routes and the framework for colonization. It addressed different issues bordering on the colonization of the African states. It confirmed the Congo Free State as the private property of King Leopold II and also confirmed the free trade proposal by making the Niger and Congo rivers free for ship traffic. The General Act also included the signing of the international prohibition of the slave trade. More importantly, it established the principle of effectivity, which stated that powers could only possess colonies if they actually possessed them. This also meant that any country which wanted possession of any territory in Africa would notify other signatory powers for formalization and recognition. The Berlin Conference was a glaring disregard for Africans. The Europeans saw their views, opinions, and ownership over their lands as irrelevant. 14 countries were duly represented at the conference, and at its conclusion, 8 out of the 14 countries started possessing different parts of the African regions. The 6 other participants, such as Austria-Hungary, Russia, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, and the United States, did not take any formal possession of any parts of Africa. However, by the end of the 19th century, all African states except Ethiopia and Liberia had been colonized by the Europeans. After the Berlin Conference ended in 1885, it led to the creation of African countries by forcefully merging different ethnic groups, cultures, languages, and people. This, of course, overrode the existing groupings, boundaries, and regions within the continent. The conference legalized what was not legal and created a ground for cooperation between the European countries on taking over the African states. The European countries claimed to offer protection to the countries they overtook. The 1884 and 1885 Berlin Conference would not only be the birthplace of colonization, but also the conflicts within and without countries, state and ethnic groups that still exist to this day. The robbery did not only end with land and territories, but also cultural artifacts, treasures, and resources yet to be regained by the continent. It was obvious that the Europeans were wolves in sheep's clothing, fueled by the desire for acquiring Africa's natural resources for the betterment of their countries. As such, there was a need to secure their portions to maintain their industrial sector, which was just starting to grow. To achieve this, they had to secure African territories that would readily provide them with the resources they needed and a market for the goods they produced. A total of 50 countries were carved out of the scramble for Africa. Great Britain took control of Egypt, Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Nigeria, and Ghana. France took a better part of Western Africa, from Mauritania to Chad, and also Gabon and the Republic of Congo. Belgium and King Leopold II controlled the Democratic Republic of Congo, while Portugal took Mozambique in the east and Angola in the west. Italy got hold of Somalia, then known as Italian Somaliland, and a portion of Ethiopia later on. Germany took Cameroon, Namibia, and Tanzania, while Spain got the smallest territory, which was Equatorial Guinea, the only Spanish-speaking...
Royal Television, anyway, ni gusu awushi. Wake Up Africa jumedi enye asem ketwa na me ho aboto asem no me re kra ho. Isanse video na mahwe no. Kire se wo hwe broni kwanya ofa so a onam so ma enne waya before se ne ayen ya. Emma obefa asase de nkrata be dada mpanyifo a na u bibini ni kra na de no kasa na de wani no onti ase. So yes say how to my sign. Now when you na mo sign ye no na ga say eno no mo fa so o mo de kotre omo no yom bibia wie da. Ti yes sign ni sa no England nya ne dia no de ko no say media ni o ya sign ama me nti aha ne ha ye media. Germany buy o say media ni me so ya sign ama me aha ne ye media. Your friend is saying Belgium, Mahu, Congo. Of fire, need to media the Congo. I be seen ne. Why Congo ni why no. When you na ye near kwesi kokko nam so a odi ye na ne mobokra ne say omun fa omunya wi a na o fa omum soldiers ne o ma de say mo mekobo banbo yanke enim sanka banbo no be bo enipa no a e bia okay Ghana England nya Ghana no Britain nya Ghana no ka bia obebo Ghana fo ho ban enya Ghana yen timanfo no bo ya ho ban o asase na wanya na agudie na ewo mu no obebo ho ban afi ni ada European nianum na ombeba say bia Ghana ombe wura ma be fa bi no enu nti no bae na obebo ho ban ni mu de amu aba ba jo mi da se yese boni sei we nyina ya tena ho a besi ne aye mpanyifo nti muntimi enhu ni ewom na yensi sasa de we nyina mu da so kwa IMF aba mi da se
you want the some the slogans no mo chant here Africa must unite, break the barriers, one Africa and one mpanyifo
azemo
I say kasatintin en top onko in America and Africa unite. There's a core problem I want. Require Bunia Faso. It's me Jones Sassy. Or no dim raba. And then a friend Terranolius. I don't know what things you did. I will do my own pepper one day. Only one that I professor and no more. Ombeji and Sassin. I let him do let him in the cry. Every your paper one day. Freedom now. Freedom again. No for me. I'm more bokra say. Yenya san prefer who dey me ya no. Ghana yenya am say ni 3 days time na na san dey say you san kosi. So o prinya on found no ma say create UN asato of myself be so za question. I go for me nyanza. I go for dream you over. Sa. Na na say I read Bibia so akere mo. Oba say sorry you say manamo ntu mbetu bi say. Oba say sorry. I say sorry na ma yeri down. Ni sua de. Everything is ka okudi university. On the 10th, mumra bi na mbesua asofo ne ade. Mumra. So, no. At the end of the day, no. On Berlin conference, there be I can want some tray. No. You dem suko. Kai. Am what me hu say. Say am the critical bi na faso. E ro mba jeans ase no. MIA legal into Tiabruchi also me colony ni Gold Coast. Me colony ni Nigeria. Me colony ni Sierra Leone. Na we ho nso ampa. Di pe we mu nyina no. E say na mo masters ni mo sum English ohima anaso ohine. Na ye ho. So kwa am de faso. E de kwa. Na be bisa sante ba no sen e no mutimi eye. E ma mutimi be J and Sassy any neke kan ho. Anyway, next video no. Okay. That's what I have to say. Next video no here. With technology and weapons of war, the imperial powers colonized Africa. When just a video no engumai.
But wait, say the European powers, let's learn from our mistakes. Instead of the old days where we always had to fight over things, in this era of revolution and warfare, remember that we're trying to be better about talking to one another, coordinating. Remember? So it's 1884, and all these big Africa-hungry European empires get together in Berlin. I mean, there's this amazing painting of just them all sitting here looking at this big, beautiful map, which would be like an amazing activity to do until you realize what's actually happening here. You've got the Chancellor of Germany, you've got the OG colonizers of Portugal, explaining this place to Belgium and France and Italy, and you've even got the new country, the United States, who showed up. Kind of new to all this imperial stuff, but quickly learning how power really works on the international stage. Basically, anyone in Europe who didn't have an empire yet got in now. Oh, and crucially, they didn't invite any African leaders. And to be clear, this painting isn't like exaggerated, like it's not a political cartoon. This is literally a bunch of European dudes in a room in Berlin in 1884 discussing and coordinating how they're going to carve up and take this continent. And they decided that there was going to be one big rule for this new scramble for Africa. No pretending. None of this only on the map fake imperialism thing that the Pope arranged for Spain and Portugal a few hundred years previous. You actually have to control the land if you're going to claim it. So they divide up the map on who gets what, they leave the conference, and they get to work. The French start moving in quickly from West Africa. The British begin taking over Sudan and expanding north from down here in South Africa to take over all of this land. The Germans really start establishing themselves here and over here. Italy starts occupying all this land up here in the north and east. And Leopold, well, he got his colony. 77 times the size of Belgium. Here it was as a blank canvas when they first started exploring in 1880. Here it is 14 years later. Little Belgium down here, giant Congo up here. The blueprint is filled out. The conquest is complete. With his new colony, King Leopold, of course, went on to do horrible things, exploiting, pillaging the resources from this place, and wreaking horrible havoc on the people. And it is horrific, and it is horrendous, and I made a whole other video that kind of goes into it more. I'll link to it, and go to the sources in the description, please. Okay. All of these empires were carving up this map, coming in, mapping it very beautifully. It's like literally the opposite of what it was. It was unknown and now it's totally known. Pillaging the resources, bringing it back home, making record profits, etc., etc. And all of this carving, it happened really fast. But wait a minute, hold on, pause. How does this make any sense? Like, it made sense when it was all like on water and there were ships and there was domination and trading ports and all of that. But this is an incredibly logistically ambitious thing to do. Like, this was actually a central question for me that led me to make this series, because I just didn't understand how these countries in a matter of a few years could completely carve up the second largest continent. Well, the answer to that question isn't that surprising. These Europeans now had a leg up. They had new tools. Remember, they had invented capitalism to make them rich. That gave them time to do science, which gave them technology that they used to make their capitalism better and more effective, more productive. This cycle repeated itself over and over and over, giving Europeans a further and further leg up technologically, until soon they had stuff like this. A steamboat. You didn't have to worry about the wind anymore to keep going. You could just steam your way all the way up African rivers.
And the old African queen.
Or the railroad, a quick way to transport food and troops. Like, you can see this map. All of this red is either railroads that they put in or railroads that they were constructing at this time. This allowed Europeans to level up not just in Africa, but everywhere. I mean, here they are in India. The British quickly taking over this entire subcontinent of what today is India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, with this massive, complex rail system that they built basically in no time. They also invented the telegraph, which could now relay messages in a matter of minutes instead of weeks. I mean, this political cartoon really personifies how powerful this was. And of course, what we've been looking at this whole time. They made maps. Big, beautiful, juicy maps showing the geography and the people and all of the land that they had conquered. In addition to technology, these empires had also perfected the art of allying with local power holders and turning the people against each other, divide and conquer, which allowed a small group of Europeans to control millions of locals. And of course, they had these. These refined killing machines that allowed small groups of European soldiers to rip through truly formidable African armies. Like, look at this painting from Sudan, where the British used their guns to slaughter 10,000 enemies with just a few hundred losses. And here, this casual caption showing that these savages were now mowed down by these modern weapons of war, clearing way for civilization.
When you saw our share a Wake Up Africa, Royal Television, so, and you feed in here. Na me wa ho me ho a hwe abifo ye kasa paawo na wa ho ne a ye hwe e kire se in 1884 to 1885 just 1 year na omo tena ase tumi drodro ne ombe ye nya nkrata ye bibia wie ya omo nya wie ye na no omo fu dem ho na no omo antena se omo anya budie kura wo e na omo sha ase ko kreti niema kwan ombe fa so ombe tumi ayeden aye sa ne mawe nyina ti omo ye ya obi afa ne bag no nya Ghana no wa fa ne niema no wa ye ne niema shape kwan no ma kreti shape omo ye ntuo and kwan omo ye sa ne man nyina ombe fa so ombe timi dia baba ampa be di wo so e na ampa omo be du ye nsuso no e na omo sha ase di railways gugu akwan because ohwe eniema na materials na e se otimi etwi ni nyina fi baby a wo bia na otimi de be e ba baby a shape no wo na otimi de eko ti omo yi railways atoto mu a omo ampa omo de fa sha to twin niema fa niema no enti won se abesi na ye jana bibini so onya no empo ye passenger railway passenger for road railway kran won se ntumi ye from Tema to Accra Yedin but kwasi kokko ba ye no esese na ni abrinti no even from Accra to Kumasi Accra to him omo ye because no mu nim se omo betim dia tweniema afi wa ba besen akọ before omo mayen sorry what youth no mayen sorry afa
na the youth obi so manda obi anga so manda
over yada over say when you nsua de nti yade nyina ne yente we tia wonu aduka na woni ne ka emi bi akọ bia mikosia no also university of Ghana ne ye di nkomo na me koka se e fene se o se kwesi kokko nye kwesi kokko anka bibini kura datade kura anka wu ni bi na wahye enti bruni na de civilization bae na me say o team abranti bi e fene what it team to da bisa no no fe osi ho nso Legon
I mean to amasam so enti yahu the Berlin conference no ebe year wo Africa resources and na pay the almost now raw materials na started the do cotton coffee near yi na chi so nka na a video say omo ewo Berlin conference na mo adwen omo say yes gold ewo Africa enti na chese afi na omo ba hwehwe so omo bitumi akọ mpeni ampa say enti na omo frɛ Gold Coast ona 2 din no was good na obe bia ene ne keka enti the imperial powers e baaye no dem ye ni say Africa de obetimi di akọ world trade a be say raw materials are now de obeye enti create raw materials na eno ne commodity a abofo sanction say obetimi di about world market about beton apart from raw materials won't mean for bia ma and they know what me say raw materials here they go in larger volumes
send betimi dia ko
yeah they go here they go in no and now fix a price no fixing the price that may amount so import expensive European manufactured goods do raw materials now they go no and the aqua add value yes add their bro and also prices no or no control and the guy who need no and for so na we free so the free ko moko ono mabo and the free onu su ko e ba ho no ono na mabo and the guy na we di no 7 who didn't say 75 ACP and EU SNA part of different Lomé Convention. Lomé Convention, you know, so who say African countries are colonized, Caribbean are colonized, Pacific nations are colonized. To any baby, raw material, yeah, no, yes, sign agreement near Niger for mutual benefits.
Let's go.
Nti yakotrasi lomi no mko
lomi
ya ro mko shi 75 and almost signing lomi convention
okay
nti ani say cause beni di kan ba me fa koko an example odi kan ba wa ko all the cocoa growing nations ni nyina say cocoa bo no e ko so nti mumma ekuafonu mpa more emra abeka bi akire Ghana akabi akire Nigeria akabi akire all the cocoa growing areas ninya nti bia atu cocoa price no nti no ekuafonu so are motivated e dey aba nti harvest time bi ya dey buy no afi aban esu ani nyina dey akọ world market Caribbean countries dey aba Pacific countries they only have and Africa continent they have. And they go do no simple economics. When supply exceeds demand, prices never fierce. And you know susudia obia ye ni se. Susudia obia ye ni se. Se ya tum local price mama ya you know. And you kwa kunya sika bibiri let us say tinya dia baba boy ho ban anko basa na you for aka say enye already supply and demand yi na ba na mum pa ba mu say na ka bia mu pe 100,000 bi and I fall short money 70 30 na ebe bombo se
gweziko boya mrusamu I be ni bronzam.
Enya sadia, safa odi enu sako. Na hwe cost in transporting sa na me baka. Enya shi me de monfa. Eni. Boni na ndi ni jiri do. Unya hunu ekwanya. Ubeti dabia oye wi ansa na and how young and I reckon it is a sad and raw materials around the deco. everyone dey go so e dey ko enti no ya ho enim kakra ya ko pictures no so
okay serious offer
picture to serious as
New African October 2005 Africa the 1884 scramble was for resources to develop Europe. Mufasa picture nento so much.
That horo. In 1885 Berlin Conference, you know, bibia we per resources they develop Europe and benya Africa for. And they say any boom kama faso. Next picture.
The Spectator, 13th October 2007. Why they carved up Africa. Mufasa picture nento so much. You cry ho.
And the same resources yeah. Boni bi. Nana Buje, no a musician. That one be a National Commission on Culture. About the year meaning their closer relations. Or any be. Also if one a man Bruni etu kwamba Africa. I'm probably I'm not the chrome the head. They will and will buy. And they say resources here and within years a steamer. Like steamer. Steamer pa no the buy. Or the buy ni na ma obenya good year or the coin. I said we two of who say ya over game. Hi. Then go next week.
Public Agenda 19th October 2007. TNC's control minerals in poor countries.
Transnational corporations women have control all the minerals in poor countries. Who can article one including Ghana. Now about the kind be you grew minerals here. Ubeka fia sa tell minerals here. Now what the aba bisi hama.
Yo. You go so kind of a my book na Telanelius Euro-Gentile conspiracy to make Africa vacant for the occupation. I have page 25 now for Ebiyama and say kind. I say powerful Euro-America dynasties have a history. I say powerful Euro-America dynasties have a history linked to the plundering of mineral resources in Africa. In 1871, for instance, a sickly Cecil Rhodes left England.
Cecil Rhodes.
Okay.
Okay.
In 1871, for instance, a sickle Cecil Rhodes left England, aged 18 years, with a life expectancy of 6 months, to join the diamond rush in South Africa. Remember the Kimberley mines. Remember the Kimberley mines. By the age of 30 years, Cecil Rhodes was the wealthiest man in the Western world.
Now, I'm sorry about to ask him. Cecil Rhodes history me say at the age of 18 years, can say we had 6 months to live. Unifi Wampaba and over South Africa, Kimberley mines have a diamond rush aba into above we rush South Africa will be a copper diamond no yari. Obi as was 6 months to live, no one know. 30 years later, Obenya Sika say ciao. And Oxford University of course setting up the World Scholarship. Now, World Scholarship man is a wow, that is only an extremely brilliant student. More belonging to the British Empire, Mona, qualify. Ghana has been 3 World Scholars, no maybe. World Scholarship, Ghana for Bakum as a 9, or more benefited from it. And the other person already say, was setting up sending new minds. I will protect British Empire no, now making sure that dynasties no, they still continue with their projects. To be honest, always 6 months to live, no. or 6 months. Yes, obey a multi-millionaire. And setting up scholarship scheme at Oxford. That's Rebecca Hansen to us money.
The German-born Sir Ernest Oppenheimer. The German-born Sir Ernest Oppenheimer, 1880 to 1957, moved to South Africa as a representative of Rothschild's diamond interest. In 1917, he established the Anglo-American Corporation of South Africa Limited, which became successful in the diamond, gold, platinum trade. In 1919, Oppenheimer took over the DBS Consolidated Mines. In 1957, the Oppenheimer dynasty controlled 95% of the world's diamond mines. Wow. In recent times, the Buccaneer Tiny Roland's Laurel company has also become a giant in Africa. In 1969, the Ashanti Goldfields Corporation was bought by Laurel, which offered the Ghana government 20% shareholding in exchange for the extension of AGC's concession lease.
Into the Tiny Roland, Ashanti Goldfields, you can in history. Laurel, and an idea.
And Ghana money 20%. No far, Nyaka Nina.
And as 20%, and they say the golden Omutudimbi. Maybe a yen areas here. You buy structure adjustment, you buy.
Away. And there's a call or a trust man. Today, Laurel operates in other parts of Africa. Africa has been a great source of livelihood for Euro-America, which has access to her abundant natural resources vital for their development. Euro-America has developed a major reliance on Africa's mineral resources, which explains their concern with political development on the continent. In fact, in 1958, Africa came to warrant a special desk at the U.S. State Department to closely monitor the socio-political development on the continent so as to evolve a strategy to contain any threats to their selfish interest. America relies on Africa for a major percentage of most critical mineral resources. 41% manganese ore. 41% manganese ore. 32% ferromanganese. 77% cobalt. 33% platinum. 30% chromite. 58% ferrochromium and 56% vanadium. Statistics source trilateralism. The Trilateral Commission and Elite Planning for World Management, edited by Holy Sklar of Abacha. Hey, everybody, as a yo, you do public agenda. 13th June 2008. Newmont gets green light to mine in forest. Wakam accuses minister of double standards. But I'm first picture next picture. Next picture here. Public agenda. 24th November 2008. Ban Ki-moon tells Africa to process raw materials. First picture next to my. Raw. After the moon process it. The reason the entire raw material they are raw states. The next picture here, public agenda, 26 July 2010. Inside Africa, The new scramble for Africa's minerals, the untold story. Mufasa picture no ento somaye. Okay. We are Ghanaian Times, 13th September 2010. Africa mustn't be mere supplier of raw materials. Mufasa picture no ento somaye. Public Agenda, 10th December 2010. All our forests sit on gold.
Ghana. All our forests sit on gold.
Ghanaian Times, 18 February 2011. China to import more raw materials. Public Agenda, 22nd July 2011. Africa EU corporations on raw materials. Mufasa picture no into some
ACP EU trade bilateral trade 75. It was 2011. Africa EU. Yes, I believe.
Ghanaian Times, 27 January 1988. Ghana records third gold boom. Deposits to last 740 years.
Wow. Gold all Ghana no. 1988 and our statistics nearby. You bet to gold will Ghana have for the next 740 years. Galamsey has come to stay.
Why? Why is there so much gold in West Africa?
Where can be view how many?
Why is there so much gold in West Africa? Okay. Of a market, baby. Of a market. Okay. Okay. Near that's na ye kind of it is so no abisi baby of a market do no. Why is there so much gold in West Africa? Published February 17, 2025. Hey, wait there a year. Okay. Militaries that have taken power in Africa's Sahel region, notably Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, have put pressure on Western mining firms for a fairer distribution of revenue from the lucrative mining sector. Gold is one of the resources at the heart of these tensions. West Africa has been a renowned gold mining hub for centuries, dating back to the ancient Ghana Empire, which earned its reputation as the land of gold because of its abundant reserves and thriving trade networks. The region remains a global leader in gold production. As of 2024, West Africa contributed approximately 10.8% of the world's total gold output of Ampatona.
In Africa, and a great source of livelihood among European countries. And now raw materials here. If you can be on the first one, access to raw materials, no. And no foreign policy because raw materials in African countries how send in Sabeka de Pia. If you see there, the raw materials no co-operate in their raw states. Now, what reason a culture Ubisuama Africa? The reason why Western countries demand the say as a South Africa raw materials are necessary produce near the bar in their raw state, you know. What is the reason now? One more think tank groups, any one and one idea Africa. Africa has so-called think tank groups. And so only men who will or much near counter. I will go. And the Tiamu, I tear and volumes of raw materials and your deco, and we get nothing for it. Your last video of the program.
Yo, I say Africa, deliberate raw materials producer in world trade. First video no engumai.
Historic Africa has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries. Okay? And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer. We will not allow sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished. It's absolutely vital for the prosperity of everyone else. So let's get clear about that. Okay, and this means all the economic structures, all the global institutions, and the economics we teach everyone is all designed to keep Africa exactly where it is. And whether it is Europe or US or now China, it's always the same. We need Africa to be impoverished because we need those raw materials and we need them dirt cheap. Okay, so that's the message. It doesn't mean to say that there's nothing Africans can do. Of course there is. Okay, but this is the opposition that they're fighting. This is what it's about. Because if Africa does do something different, I assure you living standards of all those in Europe and North America and Asia is going to fall. Okay, and that is a big price to pay. I assure you that the West is not going to allow that without a big fight. Okay, so this is what it's fundamentally about. What I want to show you is how these structures are operating. It's just 20 minutes, so we can't do very much, but just to give you a little bit of an idea. And why I keep the ideology part there is because we are part of the producers of ideology. At universities and academic institutions, we are complicit in this whole enterprise. Okay, so the job of many Western academics is to convince Africans they have to keep doing what they're doing. Okay, and to show them it's your fault that you're poor. It's not our fault. It's your fault that you're poor. You know, so this is what we do in academic institutions, and I want to show that as well. We just start. This is what it's basically about, so you know what it's about. But I want to just show you the extent to which Africa is specializing in the production of raw materials and basic agricultural goods. We know the basic forces that have caused this underdevelopment. We know it's colonization. I will not discuss that very much because my colleague speaker is going to go into some aspects of this. But I do want to discuss the global economic structures, the global financial institutions, and economic ideology, briefly, to give you a flavor of those. Let me start with this. You can't really see it so easily, but if those of you who are interested, you want the PowerPoint, I'm sure we can make it available to you. But the thing that you really need to see is the top line. Okay? And the extent of dependency is captured by this statistic at the top. Okay? And you compare it with all other income groups, and what you see is essentially in that one statistic how dependent sub-Saharan Africa is on raw material production. Okay? This is the very heart of what makes sub-Saharan Africa beat. Okay? Here, just to have a look at one very important additional statistic, with all this export coming from sub-Saharan Africa, how much does sub-Saharan Africa account for in terms of global trade value? We know there are vast resources coming from there, but look at the bottom line in terms of global trade value. Look at that. 0.5% 1975, 0.95%, going down to 0.1. To 0.1, meaning that with all these vast resources being produced, how much are they getting for it? Nothing. Nothing. This is a very significant piece of data. Then I just want to show you what has happened to sub-Saharan Africa, because what we know, and from all studies, no country ever develops without manufacturing. Okay, producing raw materials will not take you anywhere. Producing basic agricultural goods will not take you anywhere. And let's have a look at how much manufacturing activity takes place in sub-Saharan Africa. We can look over the last 15 odd years, 15, 20 years. And we see manufacturing has actually declined as a percentage of the total. This is percentages of total production in sub-Saharan Africa, how much of it is accounted for by manufacturing. So this figure here is 17% of the total. Most of the rest, when we talk of industry, it includes manufacturing, but the bulk of it is mining. Okay? Raw material extraction. This is the bulk of it. And here we see actually raw material extraction has stayed the same. What has caused industry to fall is the fall in manufacturing production. This is deliberate because we will never, as Western economists, as Western policymakers, we cannot afford to allow Africa to industrialize and start producing manufactures. Okay, so we will do everything to stop that.
She said, Obroni ayen hu nyansani e obi business wa. Wo de kwan bia wa wadwen se obetena hia mu no. We enye se eyagudie o. Papa na okasa no, ye fe no Howard Nicholas. Idinu no, oye lecturer international studies. Ono no abrofo international mu bia yi omo ba ono o kire o made. Won ni ya we nti o ma o lectures e na o kire o se adisua na musua o ha no ye se musua ate ase se be ya bibini ebetena hiam moma bibifo hu se omo de hia na na se omo tirim na ena nya mo so mo fort ena mo ti hia ni e omo anpe enu se omo raw materials se senka omo be senka omo betimi adane ani na omo de di omo duma omo mamu na omo aye na atumi anya value no dabi mo kwan mo pe kwan bia so a raw materials nyina omo be pia ba Europe bibini nya nyansa se ni raw materials no on fam baba bia ne mo no abedane ani aye ho adwuma pe mo kan say Europe America ni yan yaka no China no nyina no ye wie ya ba come be di yan ye bewu now oman ya to the extent of say raw materials no so no ye the ban for so nya efi so no o say 0.5% ye the raw materials ya sako akobu no emfa so aye nya omode maye wo so aye nya da ba ye mamu no 0.5 o say no kwa still a decline e kofom we kosikoko eti ye tell mo school and I say education no so mo da brain ni niam na mo da brain ye di tell ye wo ha no eye ne be ma ye ntumi nye productive ye ntumi ye industry ye kan ye panifo industrialization eti munim na de ban munim na de ban ye grammar ene ya kan je se makoma correct aden na before ya go di baby boni say abusiafo we video a lecture okuni nipa ena ofa akofa video na ba say ye nhwe kwan a omo fa so omo tete omo abrofo no enimdie ne kwan omo fa se nsem omo kagu omo tirim ye ne yete ha na kwasikoko ho niema yemfa nko we ena eguso a na yete ho a ena de yedu ba bi yedu no over Manso eraho of amiraho nti medibesia ema ahwefo nso mrem of amiraho obade me ahode a na otwisene ebesa of obade nsira yeda se of say aha ena ode djumadie no areho kesiye pa na me pacho me fa mo text message no na mo fa line no so ento mine na afrefo no wo fa yawo Poku Dankwa University of Yas Mind International. We are coming live 10 to enlighten ourselves. Ya bless you from so many. Yo. It's painful. We seem to blame the whites for all our problems, and it's true. But for how long can we continue this way? We claim to be educated, but output now we still do not have any solution for our problems. Our educated leaders tend to be robbers instead. We are not learning anything. What is the solution? Raymond Kumase. Hello, Udini Fakwa Ofrefi.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah,
good afternoon,
yeah. Yanko.
Madam, my friend Mohammed talking because of Afro-Asian.
Okay, yet you.
Yadamase, no obadi in Shiramu, energy Makasia, Muye Maye. Da no Maria, Motokosia, Dema, Echimadu, so a performance mapa, extra. Na, and say this or mine, a few and yet. I have a moon, Safusi Bruni, Becklashes. I na address a mini ashabredi or kakopom. Na yin say before I say you answer no. Na yesu say yin any forest and am obi benya edation ne mind. Enti esremo momo wadia na esrekre bit my idea boa my na dey na my na control part from the market.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, Africa. Oh, Africans, when are we going to value our own products? Nana Bosompim Akwetia. Yo. Also Wafa, do the Ghana president and his ministers are listening to you? Where the Sena Kuchi Bayeno, Wafa, Kuchi Biumna, Jukwa Heman. Hello, Dini Papa Ofrefi.
Hello, good afternoon. Okay,
Mpacho Yetio.
I think I'm going to get only the message I will and data.
I told you na the line to just yente voice here. Inti Corner Sambredium. I am Kwesi upon greetings. Great teachers, thanks for enlightening us. Keep it up from Zenu. Okay. Hello, Udini Papa Ofrefi. Okay, yes, you. Yo.
The Abraham Catholic, our dependent for the baby, and then any problem. I come here and I will be a papa.
Yeah, that's it. Why any simple Maya, why any sa tia. It's my first time watching your program. Please, I want to ask that is having real fake? Question no. Yeah, having a seminar yeka. Hello, Udini Papa Ofrefi. Okay, when to me and so Africa or black people will still remain impoverished and be controlled by the Westerns if we remain mentally enslaved. A continent rich with minerals and many others, as people still beg. We, after all, is wrong with our minds. It's about time we change our way of thinking. Safo, watching you live from Sefi. Okay, for Sukrom. Hello, Udini Fakwa Ofrefi.
Kasafi at Richmond.
Yo, yetio.
No, Kasafi at Richmond.
Otieno, mi pa ba. Hello, ba, entio ho. Lower volume nene menkasa. Why? Me na me kasa, nya o TV no. Hello, Udini Fakwa Ofrefi. Hello, Udini Fakwa Ofrefi.
Kasafi na de regina from Ghana.
Me ba cho bi etio.
Ya ba na sino na ka no.
Otieno ho. Please, what did you think about Burkina Faso? Is it it is a freedom, or Africans should learn from them? Abandasmon from Sua Kwao. Hello, Udini Fakwa Frefi.
Tabato, la fiamma al bianco ci mette e più ci fu plazo.
Yetio.
Era una pa.
Ema reho.
Come in Beata, abo fina, come in Beata, come ya kwano mbele chama ya tini. Ana mewa upasi en come in zone bitni ko eko ko skuwa bochira. Come in Beata, ya mo be ya be sa ya kwa. Ayi amuche katro pate ya bote Israel.
What other say?
The fear Ghana telephone if you are able to come to Mama to take our boy to Libya. But no, the penny should be also for not every day, man. Let them be to among them questions the same baby after. The family sending me up to her. One more time, woman to go to a money. Jack over. The name of the every money you have to have one couple of the Flicom Grana. Of my I say, the man is not coming, but one day not home. Yeah, and Gentium. I'm your family and telling for good deal and now you are laughing something. You have to come and check and follow with me, Kana.
Adabraka, I am a bad mind in Gentium. I know your only answer to me, baby. Does it mean the whites killed all the professors, etc., who were in the University of Timbuktu? What happened to the scientists, engineers, etc., who built the pyramids in Egypt? Wasn't it that our ancestors were also struggling for what the white man brought, so much so that they cared less about what was going on in the neighboring countries? Apieje Sunyane Onoso Dinidiaba. Hello, Udini Papa Afrefi. When to me and Jinaso. Hi, I am Williams Kwesi, inside Techiman. I really appreciate what you are doing. Keep it up. That's it. Hello, Dini Papa Afrefi.
Hello.
Hello, Dini Papa Afrefi.
With the Lawrence, you can see Takari.
Yo, Yetio.
The Matapa, Namache. Natania, the big answer and when you follow Shedia more here, Nanka, Robuana, what is your baby and the beer. Yeah,
that's it. The Pope is dead. Another Pope will be selected in this month. Yeah, Pope, I do see a chomo. Hello, Udini Papa Afrefi.
Hello?
Yeah.
Shalom.
Yeah, Udini by Yetio, Udini Papa Afrefi.
I am more because I feel you call off. I make sure I'm only only mine. If I let me talk about me, I mean, maybe very sure who the brain. You question me. You question me. But for you, you are paying for the baby. I cost me now. I can Omukedi. Omugwa sorry demo. Yes, because I'm going to teach you for the now. I'm paying for it now. No, but for you, no more to say, and you're my car. Na mo di sika no mo do mo yere no mo mba no mo bucho no mo jaye na comedy yet. Ya me be tell you paying for it.
Adabraka. Okay, yeah, that's it. No other dialect is the program only for your tribe. Hey. Hello, Dini Fakwa Ofrefi.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Okay, we doing the planning.
Yetio.
Let us show one cooking show Bakaya. Like the Luna, your cry, should be a taxing would be a little name. If you can, my work for Fidiana.
Yeah, that's it. God bless you. We short. Need the out the buy and one funny thing. Africa must be free from borderlines. Borders separate us and keep us in mental prisons. Africa must unite. Africa is rich and not poor. Yo, obidi out the buy and no. Hello, Udini Papa Afrefi.
Mr. Sophie,
If I tell you, Udin.
They say for the most Canadian, the need na kadi ba for mesro for so come for the do to there. Not introduce bigger can I get into a place to tree. Like a Ghana for you now, see the American so the more you move here, lipa. Since some other centuries are coming across the Richia, now airtime be other count. Like a tree in question for in the NTV. Over so on table for now more can I reach the might be a bit to the more.
Yo, watch na adwene. Sikandi hia, time ne de mo betua bi ma yen anka be ye de. Ani nanka senga o kase ye twi no, yo, ni nyina ye, onso wade nkyere no. Hello, udini fa kwa ofrefi.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, hello, udini fa kwa ofrefi.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Okay. We say, hey, the message in there, I know you. Hi, I'm Yeboah Damien, watching you live from Bumpuase. Keep the fire burning. I don't know what's sending the Brisano. Yo, yeah, that's it. Sabri, hello, didn't for power Frefi.
Yeah, good afternoon, senior.
Good afternoon, sir.
So me go to the cafe and get you konongo.
Yo, yetio.
Yo, na of kase before punishment ni na ye dani ye chi manya nkopao. Eni nti a so twe we ni na ye nya. But me we say ndi na ye na no tim no e aboson so e na nka ye ni akiri. Ara obi be kai e na ka se o nya me se we de ye nti ye be ni e. Ama Yakubu twe aso bi go ye tie ye nim nyankopon e na ye nim Bible ye na no aboson so no. Uti yan fe no a na ji ni se Daniel we na fe no that here any next year that before the whole class so ye be me because you factories above no factories into of antine ni mo da se be ba
yo ye da se oba ati o si Daniel daddy no ye daddy no tie nti na ma before ya yemre no na ga se ye ni no tie anu no tie ase no wa kire mu no me pacho sabri se uguso hwemi a eye wake up Africa so we leadership position bia e wo wake up Africa mu a organizer rep ye fene say secretary mu nyina ba bibia wo Ghana fana bia no eye on the 10th but modern na bpm e wo ka okudi school a ekoso ho e na oba bobeto professor emeritus 1 of ayaw onankasa ene de yemfa school ni mu na otiti yen nti brabi na beje entitiye eye on the 10th May ya time ni ye 10 pepepe baby ye hyem no eye 37 ka okudi eye culture center hwa baby awudu a na basketball ni ye friend say volleyball court ni adewa behu na nkola omudi agro no eye ho no ma ehwa na ye hyem anu nti mbomoden na bpm ebia na opese ofre na oba dwumadi ni bia obetimi afre ye 0244888910 ofre no a obetimi aba na wonso dwumadi no abpm bi ode say onya freedom mind ni na wo ye ebia sofo o ye student o baabi obi bia etimi ebabi o ba na wape book now the aba and no pen obesua de se ne awoko school na ode bra na be piem a books wo ho obeba no na ya mounted table a school is free school no ode bra obe piem a e free but modern na bra na be piem school no e free oba na do pen no book I crowd fe ode bra oba bra betenam bi na wonsusu ade na adesua ekoso wo ha no eno na kese ena oba beto ewo ho eye on the 10th May ya Kaokudi culture center hwa bomo na obepiem a hello.
Yeah, hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Afternoon. But I promise you.
About the other.
Yeah. mpacho me bisase Africa no democracy no eyemaye
yo o question no offer ate offer say Africa no democracy am say dey we dey offer chire mu pa o democracy offer mpacho say democracy no eyemaye okay offer say what o question no enti obeyi ano why hello dini papa ofefi
hello
yeah hello
what's up
okay yetio
ita to sa adako so wo ya mo chere no die jadi ni pa na ade indie ko a wo wo man no ntumi ni fe eni ma wo se nyina afupe to di ka san kaka o mu ni mo he adente mu so esokoro se tu no ko o se adama mu pe fu asan san kaka maton ani Africa continent maton aga ekime ni mo he ani pe fu no eni mi ndiri apa ho awose bawumia mama akufu ado wa nya no awon de boko do nya out because omo mo man no
yo
omo man no adente mo ni die
yo oba na waye ne entientie mu e de amaye ono so na dwenkyere no adwenkyere ide o se ye mpanyifo no adenti e na mpanyifo no ensori na omunsiw abrofo no se o my diensa abrowi okay yo hello dini papa afefi
hello
we
are family class because that's western off
okay e ba to yetio
and our simple way if you need to amu nyani aba ho na be nya be ya akro ani asokori ya tinya apate gizi ida wase
yeah so yeah that's it okay message he said it's my first time watching your program. Please, I want to ask that is okay. Wasan dia babium me pacho and then you having program and a year nti what they having program bar yen to me and kan wasem. Hello, Rini Papa.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, let me contribute to your program. Yeah. I listened to Whopper. But I was speaking so much. I think when the white man came talking about Africa, they had to support Africa. That agriculture cannot save Africa. We will become poor. He also said that even when we do all exports, we will still be poor. But the only solution to bring Africa out of poverty is manufacturing. But my question is, where did you get this information? Why don't you make this information to the government to see what to do? You see, we find a way of bringing Africa out of agriculture.
The kasa no, person or say, offer kasa, yeah, only way out. I say you fire raw materials in co. Now you be factories. Now I know na the kasa no enye clear enti ono tire say adentina of an person or say hello. Yeah. Okay. Yetio.
Yeah, I told you that. Why coming on? The people are not man to China or cabinet meeting now. Show the meeting now. The fees are double. Into the next person, Kabaya, the phone command. But when you're Kuana, you're the video, you're cabinet phone. One thing for Nomina, women video of away. I brought Ghana for the move and come on, why your friend.
You watch the wagene na yet bia wani woti mamuni no say unnim ne ekọ say unhu ne ekọ a opanyi ni ba na okasa na ose to abama na obehu obebisa no questions ansa na wato wabebisa no questions na wakire wo na niso ade hu no eni ba bi opese ode okuro no efa na afi wahu se eye ne a ode giwafi obroni nsam we a ha na afọ watimi ato ma no wenti na ye sa dwumadie wotima amuni na wonya okay dwumadie wake up Africa dwumadie na wani guso a wo hwe yi ene kwesieda bia premoto a 12 to 2 na ene panyi amene ne di dwuma ofa ya opoku danko a oye executive director edema eku FN free the mind movement ono enene oni mi di dwuma yi Israel de dwumadie binti wantimi amepiem dwumadie mu me ametena dwumadie mu se dwumadie mti amemidi ane kofi komi abo ade dom yen na so de chen a da se ne ebesan ya makram